Previously on Part 1 of the Gila County Special. Starting north of the town of Strawberry on the edge of the Mogollon Rim, I headed east along Forest Road 300 into the Coconino National Forest. I visited General Springs Cabin, located along the historic Crook Trail, before branching off to the north to visit the site of the Battle of Big Dry Wash. I explored the history of the 1882 battle here on the edge of East Clear Creek, which marked the last major clash of the Apache Wars between the U.S. Cavalry and Apache, before eventually returning back to Rim Road. Towards the end of the day, I split off onto a muddy forest trail to find an incredibly scenic spot on the edge of the Mogollon Rim, where I camped out for the night. Today, I continue with day 2 of my trip, heading east along the rest of Rim Road, hiking to a historic railroad tunnel in the side of a cliff, and visiting another set of cabins along the way. The drive will be full of some big views and some unexpected surprises as I make my way towards my next camp at the edge of the isolated and breathtaking Promontory Butte. It was around 6:45 when I woke up. The sun had just risen and was gently illuminating the mountains in the distance. Below the rim, the forest still lay in shadows as the topography and a layer of morning clouds blocked most of the incoming light. The night had been decent, with the temperatures dipping into the lower 40s and a steady wind picking up throughout. It was chilly and breezy when I made it out of the tent. One of the window poles had come out during the night, and the extra layer of the rainfly meant it had been just a bit noisier than usual. I enjoyed looking at a few late fall colors that remained in the canyon below me as I got up and around. On the docket today was a hike, not far down the road, so getting a decent breakfast going was goal number 1. I got a skillet heating and some water going for some much needed coffee. After getting a tortilla cooked up, it was soon on to eggs, which eventually got combined with some breakfast sausage and cheese. It didn't take long to get a breakfast burrito assembled and the coffee steeped and prepared. A nice warm meal and caffeine was much appreciated as it was still quite chilly, even after the sun rose some more. After doing some dishes and camp cleanup, it was time to fold up the tent and get rolling on the day. Folding up the tent took a few minutes, but the rest of the gear quickly packed into the back of the Jeep. After making sure my spot was in better shape than when I found it, I hopped in the Jeep and fired it up. From camp, I worked my way back to the spur trail that would take me back to Rim Road. I wasn't too far off this trail, and aside from a couple of other late evening travelers yesterday, I had the place to myself. The trail back northbound was still muddy and just as fun as it had been yesterday. Some puddles were shallow, but a few still had quite a bit of water accumulated, which was quickly giving the Jeep a nice new paint job. It was only about a mile from camp to Forest Road 300, which I quickly turned left onto to head for the first stop. This would be the final bit of backtracking before continuing east on New Trail for the rest of the day. Rim Road descended past a few nice views before arriving back at the turnoff for General Springs Cabin, which marked the trailhead for my hike. I parked off the busy main road and switched over to hiking mode. For the next few hours, it would be on foot, so a nice change of pace from cruising around in the Jeep. All right, off for our first hike of the trip. Back at that same junction we spent quite a bit of time at yesterday, and I promise we're not going to spend the entire trip here. This is our last stop. Yeah, so anyways, railroad tunnel trail, about 1 mile round trip. Just crossing Forest Road 300 right now. Got parked, and here's the trail right here. From Rim Road, it would be a little over half a mile and 500 feet or so of elevation loss and gain in each direction. The trail immediately begins descending off the edge of the rim along a section of another hiking trail called Colonel Devon Trail, trail number 290. There are a few trail junctions to navigate, as the Arizona Trail also follows this section for a short while. Things were well defined and the scenery immediately improved, passing interesting rock layers on the surrounding cliffs and a few small waterfalls. It was still breezy and chilly, so keeping some warm layers on was a must. The trail continued a steady descent towards the old railroad tunnel turnoff I was aiming for. The trail can be hiked either from the north end where I started, or from the bottom of the rim, which is longer and involves more elevation gain. After a while, the trail leveled out and came to a cleared junction. Here, the views were pretty great as the surrounding forest was partially burned, and the views looking down the rim were quite nice. It was here I split off onto Railroad Tunnel Trail, number 390, which was clearly signed. From here, it was about another 1/10 of a mile uphill. The trail was tougher to follow as it navigates over fallen trees and a boulder-strewn drainage as it aims for the tunnel, which was still out of sight at this point. Things got a bit steeper before I arrived at a small clearing perched on the side of the Mogollon Rim, marking the end of the official hiking trail. Before me was a large opening of the railroad tunnel and a decent-sized stone structure off to the right. I had made it. I immediately went into the tunnel to investigate. The tunnel begins very tall and wide. An unfortunate amount of graffiti marks the side of the tunnel, and it appears someone has built a campfire ring inside as well. The tunnel quickly narrows as it heads deeper into the darkness. The bottom is marked with a fine dirt, presumably from the drilling operation during construction. An uncomfortable amount of cracks remained in the rocks of the ceiling, however, little to no evidence of actual collapse. I climbed deeper into the tunnel, where it soon narrowed down to a point barely large enough to stand in. This is where the tunnel ended. So why in the world was this rugged spot decided on for a railroad tunnel? The story begins with one man, named James W. Eddy, and his plans to build the Mineral Belt Railroad. It was 1881, and Eddy saw the potential of moving resources between northern and southern Arizona. At the time, the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railway crossed northern Arizona, and the Southern Pacific crossed southern Arizona. Eddy realized that much of the lumber resources of the northern forests around Flagstaff could be very useful down south, and easier access to the numerous mines of central Arizona would allow the area to export its riches and boom faster. By the summer of 1883, Eddy had secured enough investors and began construction on the tunnel here. which would be the biggest obstacle on his planned railroad line from Nogales to Lee's Ferry near Utah. 42 men worked throughout the summer, carefully drilling and blasting their way into the rim. The tunnel would need to be 3,100 feet long in order to ascend the rim and maintain a gentle enough grade for rail traffic. By the end of the summer, however, only 70 feet was completed, well short of the goal. The project had run out of money, and Eddie worked to gain additional investors. The money he did secure, however, was used to lay 35 miles of track to the south of Flagstaff. After running out of money again, the Mineral Belt Railroad project was abandoned. The tracks were stripped and the tunnel was left unfinished. The stone structure outside of the tunnel was apparently used as a powder house for the project. Whenever I visit a place like this, especially the more kind of hard to get to, it always blows me away at the mindset and the motivation of the people that built these kind of things. You know, this is not an easy place to get to nowadays. Granted, it only took me an hour and I'm a little bit out of shape, but back in the day, trying to build this tunnel, get the equipment up here, the tools up here, the people up here, and then to work in this very steep terrain is just mind-blowing, and it is always fascinating to think about their determinations and their motivations, what made them come out here and do this. You know, in this case, they were going to construct a railroad from Nogales to Utah, and this just happened to be the way they decided. You know, in hindsight, there were probably far easier ways to go, but they attempted to go through here. Now, they didn't end up succeeding, but it's kind of a reminder of our own motivations. You know, would we go through this kind of effort, you know, in our own life, our own society, or whatever? It's kind of a lesson in how bad do you want it. So I don't know, maybe the high elevation's getting to my head a little bit, but just a thought I had and wanted to share with you before heading back downhill, back to the Jeep. But it was cool to see this. Again, not a super popular place. You know, not everyone can get here. Very fortunate to have seen it, documented it, told the story, and just learned about the past, which is what I love to do. Exploring the tunnel was fascinating and an interesting look into an obscure piece of history. Heading back, I scrambled back down the rough section of trail. Things got easier and remained incredibly scenic, and so far, I had the entire trail to myself. At the bottom of the hill, I rejoined the main hiking trail and continued uphill back towards the Jeep. It was a steady climb back up along the edge of the Mogollon Rim. The trail itself wasn't particularly difficult, especially if you are in decent shape. After passing only one other person, I soon found myself back at the top along Rim Road. I crossed the road and got back to the Jeep. Round trip, the hike took about an hour and a half, with a decent chunk of time spent stopped at the tunnel. I returned to Rim Road and proceeded eastbound, leaving this junction I had spent so much time over the last day and a half. From here on out, it would be new ground. The road climbed a bit and remained very well maintained and fast moving. Tall ponderosa pines dominated the scenery. The road traversed the edge of the rim, which, depending on the section, was either a few hundred feet or just a few feet away in places. And it was along these sections that make the drive so nice. There are countless overlooks and camping spots just off the main road that offer a commanding view of the drop-off. The road had a few tight turns and a slightly washed out section, but overall didn't even require high clearance at this point. "8 miles down Forest Road 300, I arrived at my next turnoff for the day. I split off north, onto Forest Road 137 to head for another set of historic cabins. The trail immediately got rougher. Some exposed rocks slowed my pace in places. Overall, it still wasn't bad by any means. The surface was rockier as the trail twisted and turned through a dense section of forest. Having my tires aired down made the drive just a bit smoother and quieter inside the Jeep. The weather was cool and breezy, and despite having not rained in a bit, a few small puddles remained along the road. I continued northbound as the trail slowly dropped through the forest, and after about 4 miles from Rim Road, I arrived at the spur road for Buck Springs Cabin and turned off. The road became narrower as it headed downhill. The trees hugged the edge of the trail, and before long, I pulled into the cabin, which has several buildings to explore. The first of 3 cabins was built here at Buck Springs sometime between 1903 and 1905. The original structure sat to the south and no longer remains today. In 1923, the second, smaller cabin was built. It was a very simple, one-room structure designed for use as a fire guard station. The hand-hewn logs appeared quite old. The windows have since been boarded up, and the metal roof remains in good shape. The building is locked and out of use today, but remains preserved for its historical significance. The larger cabin, the last of the 3 built, was constructed in 1946 by 2 Forest Service employees. It was also designed to be used as a fire guard station, and apparently is still used as needed during the fire season. The 3 cabins at Buck Springs and the numerous others in the vicinity were built in this remote region to combat the large amount of lightning-caused fires that occurred during monsoon season. This area receives heavy thunderstorms throughout the summer due to the sharp rise in elevation of the nearby Mogollon Rim. While both cabins remain locked and boarded up today, walking around the outside makes for an interesting stop. Set in a small but scenic meadow, you really feel away from the hustle and bustle of Rim Road. It's easy to imagine fire crews relaxing on the porch of the larger cabin during their time off. While you can't get a glimpse inside either cabin, the newer one at one point featured a large stovepipe, well water, and other basic amenities that would have been nice for such a remote area. Just up the road from here is the scenic Barbershop Canyon and a network of other forest roads to explore. Buck Springs, along with General Springs Cabin and a few others in the area, are connected by a popular hiking trail known as the Cabin Loop. So just a quick stop here at Buck Springs Cabin. There's really not much to look at other than the outside of the 2 cabins. Of course, this one was built in 1938. The other one was built before that, so they are historic structures, but you can't go in them. You can walk around the outside, and they are in this pretty meadow, so it's worth the stop if you're passing through the area. And as you can probably tell from out there, it is getting cold. Very breezy. There's been this biting cold wind pretty much all day, which is kind of a sign of things to come tomorrow and the next day, which is why we're going to be heading for lower elevation. But anyways, wanted to make the stop here at Buck Springs. I had some extra time, and it's been a while since I've been here, so I wanted to check it out one more time. I've got all my snacks. It's basically going to be my lunch to tide me over until dinner time. So we're going to get underway and head back to Rim Road and keep heading east. While I thought about continuing north to explore some more, I decided to continue back southbound towards Rim Road. That way I could start heading for camp. I turned left out of the Buck Springs spur and proceeded south on Forest Road 137. It was a scenic drive as I slowly curved through the seemingly endless forest. The trees still held a hint of fall colors, and the best part, there had still been no other traffic on this road. I enjoyed a snack and some music, aiming for Rim Road. 4 miles from Buck Springs, the road got rocky and dropped back onto Forest Road 300. I stayed left to continue east towards my next campsite on Promontory Butte, about 15 miles down the road. The drive immediately turned back to overwhelming in the scenery department. The trail would follow along the rim for a bit, then dive back into the thicker trees before coming to the next big view. It was just a few miles down the road when I was cruising and enjoying the view, when suddenly I came to a roadblock and a minor traffic jam. A fairly small tree must have just fallen, blocking the busy thoroughfare that is Rim Road. But it was just enough to stop traffic. There were a couple cars on my side of the tree and a few more on the other. When I pulled up, a Tacoma was trying to move the tree out of the way with a tow strap, but to no avail. After chatting with them for a minute, I was quick to offer my winch, excited at the opportunity to finally use it and to reopen the road for those waiting. I pulled the Jeep into position and got the winching gear ready. As soon as I went to spool out the winch, however, there was a major problem. My controller wasn't working and the winch appeared to be unpowered. This was certainly one of the worst possible times to come to this realization, but it was too late to back out at this point. It was now on to Plan B. Manually spool out enough winch line to connect to the tree and tow the tree clear. Pulling out the line was pretty tough, but after some assistance from one of the guys, we got enough line out to reach the downed tree. After things were hooked up, the Jeep made pretty quick work pulling the tree back and creating enough of a path for traffic to pass. Which, in all reality, us three guys probably could have moved it by hand, but this way was certainly more fun. After getting the winch unhooked, the traffic was flowing again, and I did a little more clearing of the road of some of the larger branches. It was fun getting to reopen the road, and those waiting thanked me for my service. But I now had another issue to deal with: how to get the 20 to 30 feet of winch line spooled back in to my unpowered winch. After looking for a blown fuse or an obvious wire shortage, I found nothing. Just a few minutes later, while I was on the phone with my mechanic back home, a road grader arrived and made short work pushing the tree the rest of the way off. In order to keep moving towards camp, I opted to just wrap up the winch line around the shackles to at least get it out of the way for now. Luckily, I hadn't needed to use my winch to pull myself out of anything, and hopefully I wouldn't need to for the rest of the trip. Back on the move, I continued eastbound. The drive was incredibly smooth and fast moving, and the views remained stunning. After just a few more miles, I entered into the Apache Sitgreaves National Forest, leaving behind Coconino. Here, the road got even wider and remained extremely well graded. This was a dirt superhighway at this point. The views continued to impress, and at one point I had to stop and check it out. The overlook was incredibly windy, especially near the edge of the rim, but was worth the stop. The view looking south into Gila County was commanding and completely unobstructed. Despite the large number of vehicles moving back and forth, it's easy to find seclusion at the countless overlooks. Not far down the road, I passed the snowmobiling sign, evidence that this area receives a significant amount of snow in the winter, before I eventually split off on the final spur to get to camp. I was now on Promontory Butte, a large piece of land that juts out along the edge of the Mogollon Rim. The views and campsites along this 4-mile trail to the edge are incredibly scenic and typically very isolated and quiet. Continuing south along Forest Road 76, things remained mostly easy for a while. The scenery was unchanged, and there were several nice clearings that would have made for a fine camp. Many of the trees in this area were marked with spray paint, presumably to be cut by a lumber operation in the future. It was clear that this road doesn't get a ton of traffic, as a large number of pine needles covered the road in places. The trail slowly deteriorated as I continued along. There were a few unsigned turns to navigate, but I continued to aim south towards the edge of the plateau. After each turn, the road got rockier, and the trees slowly crept in, making the trail narrower. The drive was fun as I weaved through the forest. Aside from coming to a crawl a few places, I was able to keep a decent pace. The road was in much better shape than the last time I had done it. After a few miles, I was on the final stretch. The road split to form a loop along the rim, and I stayed right. The trail here was incredibly tight in areas and slow-paced. Luckily, I hadn't come across any other downed trees. I came to a large meadow and continued inching south towards the edge of the Mogollon Rim, which was now in view. The trail through the meadow was incredibly muddy and nearly non-existent in places. After returning to hard-packed dirt, the trees began to thin out, and I could see sky and mountains off to my right. I pulled off at the first available campsite, but I don't think I would have to worry about anyone else close by tonight. This spot was exactly what I was looking for. It was nice and open with lots of visibility. It was isolated and far enough off the beaten path, and had an even better view than last night. Since I was at the very south end of Promontory Butte, I was able to enjoy views to the east, to the south, and to the west, basically surrounded by a massive drop-off with no obstructions. It was clear that many people have camped here before. There was a large fire ring with a built-in wind guard to fight the fierce winds coming up from below the rim. A few smaller fire rings dotted the area along the edge. I opted to park the Jeep a bit further from the rim and closer to the trail I came in on. By the edge it was still quite breezy and gusty, but even a few feet off the rim it was significantly less windy. I took a few moments to enjoy the incredible scenery. There was still at least an hour and a half of daylight, so I wasn't in a big rush. I walked the road to the east and found a few other really nice campsites, but as far as I could tell, I was the only one out here. By about 4:30, I had made it back to camp. Once again, I had lucked out and found a perfectly flat space to park the Jeep without the need of leveling it in any way. I got to work on setting up camp, starting with the tent. My biggest issue with last night's camp was the wind, so this spot here seemed to be less gusty, which would mean a quieter night of sleep. It was also set to be chillier tonight. Setting up the rest of camp, including the kitchen, lighting, and seating, didn't take long at all. And here we are, night number 2's camp. Just an incredible view out here on this vista. Actually set up a little bit in just to get away from the wind because right on the edge of the rim, obviously super windy, but you just step, 50, 100 feet away and there's significantly less wind. So I think that's boding well for tonight. The weather should be a little bit nicer as far as the wind goes. It's still gonna be cold, but that is okay. But just a fantastic day today. Really, we hit all our stops like we wanted to, had a lot of fun. Got to, have some fun doing some road maintenance for a little bit, and then the winch decided to do what it did. But all in all, it was just a great day, and we're ending with this incredible view. It's only about 4:45. I've actually been here for about an hour already, just kind of walking around, seeing, the sights, kind of enjoying the view from the edge for a bit, and then getting camp set up. So we still have about an hour before the sun goes down and we start to lose our light. Probably get started on dinner around that time. But just want to take in the view and enjoy. This is our last night up on the rim and the weather's nice, pretty clear skies. It's been cloudy for most of the day, but we got some sunshine and some blue skies right now. The wind is a little bit calmer, so I think that's going to bode for a nice night. And now it's time to relax and just enjoy the view for a while. I cracked open a nice tasty beverage and sat down to enjoy what remained of the daylight. The more time I spent around camp, the more I fell in love with the spot. No matter which direction I looked, the views were absolutely phenomenal. The sun danced in and out of the clouds and provided some insane views up and down the edge of the rim. Promontory Butte is a special place. While technically part of the larger Mogollon Rim as a whole, it feels unique and isolated from the rest of the hustle and bustle along Forest Road 300. It was almost like being on an island, just me and this patch of forest and incredible geology with no one around for what felt like miles and miles. A few developed areas dotted the landscape, but for the most part, it was unobstructed wilderness as far as you could see. As the sun continued plummeting towards the horizon, the views somehow kept getting better. It was an absolutely magical moment as I stood on the edge of the rim and enjoyed probably the best golden hour moment I had ever witnessed. The increasingly better view, coupled with a great couple of days of the trip so far, had me feeling incredibly happy and content. This had quickly become one of, if not the best campsites I had ever stopped at. Alright, it's time to get started on dinner. Just kind of been hanging out here for a little bit, finishing my beer. I'm literally bundled up right now. I got the beanie on. The last I checked, it was about 45 with the wind chill. That was well before the sun went down though, so it's probably closer to 40 right now, which is making for a little bit of a chilly night. But quick dinner tonight. Basically just have to warm some things up. Don't plan on being out here for too long because it's cold. Not as bad as yesterday though, so let's do that. Tonight would be a simple meal, kielbasa and rice, because the less time I could spend outside in the cold, the better. I fired up the stove and quickly combined the ingredients together to warm up. I threw in a splash of beer to help all the flavors get to know each other a little bit better. It really didn't take long at all, and I crawled up into the tent to eat and get out of the weather. Dinner ended up being fantastic. The cheesy rice really helped elevate the meal, and the beer was a good call as always. Before fully turning in for the night, I decided it was time to try a new dessert. After struggling mightily trying to unwrap the foil with freezing cold hands, I eventually got things assembled per the instructions. I threw the foil wrap into the cast iron to heat up. By the time it was about done, I grabbed dessert and retreated up into the tent for the night. Okay, and it's about bedtime. Been hanging up here in the tent for the last couple of hours. I don't know if you can hear right now, but the wind has picked up a little bit. Luckily, I am still sheltered from it a bit because I'm off the rim. I went and set up a camera down there right on the rim, and it was gusting probably around 20-30 miles an hour, just super strong wind. But up here it's far better. It is still very chilly though. Last I checked with the wind chill, it was about 38 degrees, and it's going to keep dropping throughout the night, so I'm all bundled up. I have my second sleeping bag ready to cocoon into for the night in order to stay nice and toasty. But it was a really great day today. The night was super relaxing here at camp, just hanging out, enjoying the views and enjoying the peace and quiet. But peace out from night 2, and see you all in the morning. Can't wait to see what it holds. Good night. Tune in next week as I continue part 3 of my journey through Gila County. On day number 3, I'll drop off the Mogollon Rim as I turn south to head for the town of Young and the marvelous Sierra Ancha Mountains along the scenic Desert to Tall Pines Highway. I'll explore the rich history of Young and the long-running and bloody Pleasant Valley Range War that occurred here between 1882 and 1892. Later in the day, I'll push deeper into the mountains, finding a scenic place to hunker down for the night and brace for the oncoming inclement weather that was set to hit the area on day 4, which would certainly make things very interesting.